Graeme, I vaguely remember that it's 2 years ago, thereabouts, that the Nutrition Exchange series of articles came about. And I think it's been a roaring success in my view anyway, and I know you've got me to contribute to a couple of them. I think we're into the 14th one now. But what's your thinking behind it? Why did you decide this was something that we needed to do?
Well, yeah, we are coming up to 2 years now, Don, and it basically came from, as an academic, we do all this research, don't we? And, we're always trying to produce the next best paper. And I think sometimes we get it wrong in academia, that the second we write a paper, our thought process is, what do we write next? Or what's the next study? And actually, there's so much good information we know in sport nutrition that the end user doesn't know about. And it got me thinking that actually, the best thing we can do is rather always think about the next article, but now start thinking how best to translate it. And I know you could say that the information is out there in journal format, but how many strength and conditioning coaches or nutritionists really have time to get into PubMed and read the actual original articles? So I thought a great thing to do would be to try and keep the science strong, but translate these into a bit more of a user-friendly manner, and also try and tackle the hot topics that I know we're being asked every day from the industry. And that's why the first one we did, was vitamin D.
Now, when you look at the 14 articles that have been written to date, in fact there's a 15th one also coming out, I guess you can classify them, can you, into different categories?
Yeah, so we've got a combination of what we would maybe say the macronutrients. So we've got carbohydrates, we've got protein coming out real soon. We've got the micronutrients, things like vitamin D. We've got some of the supplements that are covered, like the beta-alanine, creatine, fish oils. And then we've got some really nice ones that I might classify as contextual situations. So we've got plant-based eating, we've got Ramadan, and we're working on the junior athlete, the older athlete, the female athlete. So a really nice breadth of articles. And as you know, this month, because you wrote it for us, it's all about milk. We're going back to the old school a little bit here. I remember as a youngster growing up being told by my grandparents that milk is the best drink you can be having as an athlete. And we go back to the 80s, and it was even on the TV, Ian Rush telling us that if we didn't drink lots of milk, we weren't going to be good enough to play for anyone except Accrington Stanley. No disrespect to Accrington Stanley, who is actually a team that we've worked closely with at Nutrition X. But maybe you can explain a little bit more why milk is now seen as this great food from an athletic perspective.
Yeah, well, I guess coming from it in sort of historical terms, humans have actually been using milk as a nutritional product for thousands, tens of thousands of years, ever since they've sort of had animals and looked after animals. And of course, milk is something that a mother animal gives to her young to develop, and so therefore it contains all the nutrients that are useful. So why not use milk? It's got protein, it's got essential fatty acids, it's got minerals and vitamins, immunoglobulins, immune function factors, and so on. So it contains a wide spectrum of nutritious products, so why not use it? If we give it to our children, why can't athletes use it as well? And there has been, I guess in the last 10 years or so, developing research into exploring the benefits of milk, not just for its protein source, but also as a hydration product.
Yeah, if we stay on protein for a second, I don't think a lot of people realise that when we use these proteins now, whether it be whey or casein, the source product is actually milk. And I know a few people who have, when we think about whey, we don't want to use whey, it's this steroid type compound, and actually, it actually is milk itself. So, from a protein perspective, are we saying it's one of the best ways for us to achieve our protein targets?
Yes and no. I think the research, certainly milk contains, as you pointed out, we get whey and we get casein from milk and dairy products anyway. But the actual amount of protein that milk contains is relatively, well, I was going to say small, is modicum. Yeah. And therefore, if you want larger amounts of protein, you actually have to in some way get it out of the milk, and that's what whey and casein do. But of course, drinking milk in its own right contains a reasonable amount of protein anyway. It just means that you might have to drink quite a lot of milk to get the same amount as you would in a dried product such as whey or casein. The other thing is that the quality of the protein. You have to remember that proteins are made up of amino acids, and there are 9 essential amino acids, and there are the three branch chain amino acids are the key drivers for muscle protein recovery, muscle protein synthesis. Milk contains them, whey contains them, casein contains them, all in good amounts, and therefore that's why we feel that both milk and whey and casein are very, very useful protein products. But if you ask me the question, as you did in a way, is milk better than whey, better than casein? The answer is, it depends on what you want it for. If it's for recovery of muscle per se, I would say you probably need to have a little bit more protein, therefore you need to have some more whey or casein rather than drink buckets of milk.
So apart from the protein side of milk, the other thing in recent years that is getting loads of attention is milk as this super hydration product. Yeah. I remember one particular paper from, I think it was Stu Galloway and Ron Morn was involved in it, where the beverage hydration index of a lot of products was compared, and I seem to remember milk came out pretty top. So what do you think about milk as a hydration product?
Yeah, I think Ron Morn, Susan Shirreffs and Stuart Galloway have done some research on that, and I certainly remember reading Susan Shirreffs' paper where she compared milk with carbohydrate electrolyte drinks in terms of rehydration after exercise, and there were clear benefits of milk. Because you have to remember that to have a good rehydration product, you need sodium. Actually having protein, having carbohydrates as well, doesn't make a difference. It's actually the sodium content of the product that's more important from a rehydration point of view. And milk contains sodium, and it contains other electrolytes in amounts that allow it to be a good rehydration product. So it's a fluid, it contains sodium, and as a side issue for rehydration, it also contains protein, so you can get your muscles to recover. It contains carbohydrates, you can get some carbohydrate benefits as well. So all in all, it's actually a very good, useful product. And if I remember rightly in that paper, Susan did show that actually milk was preferential to a carbohydrate electrolyte drink, which surprised me.
Yeah, I seem to remember that the only thing that did better was a specific oral rehydration solution. Yeah. And when you put the spectrum of drinks ranging from the oral rehydration, milk, sports drinks, all the way down to, I think, tea, coffee, and I even think lager might have appeared in it at one point. Yeah. But I seem to remember milk was coming second. So to kind of wrap up the conversation on milk a little bit, I guess there's certain situations whereby knowing what we know about milk, it can help us get out of some tricky situations. So, for example, I'm thinking of travelling athletes who might not be able to get their hands on a batch-tested whey supplement. Maybe a good time, if in doubt, go and get some milk. Or even a youth athlete who we may have a no supplement policy within the youth structures, but we want to give them a good post-training drink. Is milk our answer?
The answer is yes, when you can't get hold of other products. It certainly is. And I do remember having worked with academy players and youth players in various professional football teams and also with rugby teams and swimmers, young swimmers, to sort of say, if you can't get your hands on a carbohydrate electrolyte drink or whatever it is, and try thinking about having milk product or milk-based products. So you can actually go to a supermarket or a newsagent and get certain drinks like Yazoo, for example. So it's got added carbohydrate. So whereas milk has got the protein, it's a fluid, it's got the sodium, etc., etc. Maybe from a complete point of view, it needs a little bit of extra carbohydrate, and so you can get that in some of these drinks. I guess because they're in supermarkets and so on, and they're natural products, you could say that they should be suitable for kids to drink.
Yeah, one thing I've certainly been doing in this kitchen with my kids in the morning, and I'm taking the credit, but it's actually my wife who does it most mornings for me, is my kids each morning now are having a morning smoothie to try and increase, they're highly active, they're not, in my opinion, eating enough, and they're not getting enough vitamins and minerals. Yeah. So she's making a morning smoothie on a milk base, adding berries, adding spinach, adding different fruits, whether it's bananas or strawberries, and we're getting off to a great start to the day. So we're using milk as a base compound, but then adding a few things extras to add a bit difference in taste, but also set them off to a great start to the day.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the other things, Graeme, in this particular article that I put down at the end, it's something that hasn't really been researched too much at this moment in time, is that of looking at other sources of milk rather than bovine milk. So the main focus of the article is on bovine milk, but obviously with the points about having vegetarians and vegans, other sources of milk that are available. And I've actually put a section at the tail end of this to say that needs a little bit more research. But in terms of the differences, I suppose, is that both soy and oat and almond milk and so on and so forth are milks, but they're not really animal type milks. And so where they are a little bit lacking in a way compared to bovine milk is in the protein quantity and quality, as well as the essential fatty acids. So they are a source of protein. So don't ignore it, and I'm sure that as time goes on that they might have additions to them. So if you can add or increase the protein content, if you can increase the essential fatty acid content, if you can and do that, you've got a product fairly similar to milk, but at this moment, bovine milk, but at this moment in time, the answer is no, that they haven't got those benefits.
I don't think we've covered yet the difference between full fat, semi-skimmed and skim milk, and whether actually you've got a preference of what type of milk should people be having, and do you lose any of the real benefits by turning to some of the skimmed and semi-skimmed versions?
It was a good question, Graeme, because I remember at Everton Academy, one of the parents asked me a question, and I was giving a talk some years ago to youngsters developing. From a protein point of view, there's probably very little, if no difference between the three sources of milk. As you know, effectively, a full-fat milk contains everything, whereas a skim milk contains all the protein and so on, minus most of the fat. So from a health perspective, full-fat milk is probably better for a developing child because it's got all the essential fatty acids. So that's helping develop brain, it's helping develop muscle, etc., etc. From the protein point of view, no, it doesn't make a difference. From things like calcium, magnesium, minerals and vitamins, not a difference. It's mainly about fat. So it's a question of what you want. So from a lighter perspective for adults and adult athletes and so on, maybe skim milk would be good, and then you can add more protein to it. But if you want it from a health perspective and a growing child, a developing athlete, I'd say full fat or semi-skimmed.
And what about a 45-year-old professor in his morning flat white?
What do you like, Graeme?
It's got to be full fat all the way.
Fine. It's taste, isn't it?
Correct.
Fat adds a great taste to it. And I have to say, if you're mixing some of the Nutritionist, whey protein and so on, I like mixing it with Blue Top. Graeme, we've just talked about milk and so on as an article has just come out. But I do remember late last year and earlier this year, you've written some articles and given some great talks, I have to say, on something that you call food first but not food only. And these are talks to athletes. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we all use this term food first, don't we? And like often happens, people come up with a term, they think it's brilliant, and then actually when you come to think what it means, no one's ever actually defined it. So I don't think anyone had ever really defined the food first phrase. And in my opinion, what food first means is where practically possible, we should be trying to get our nutrition from whole foods and whole food sources. So like you've just been talking about milk and things like that. And if we want to get protein into our diets, we're looking at fish and chicken and beans and eggs and soya and things like that. But what had happened was people had grabbed hold of this terminology of food first and hijacked it into meaning food only. And I was finding myself in situations where, let's say for example, we've got a diagnosed vitamin D deficiency, but organisations were saying to me, we're a food first organisation, so we can't correct that deficiency by giving a vitamin D supplement. And I don't think anyone ever meant that's what food first meant. And that's why I came up with food first, but not food only, and tried to put the argument forward that there are certain situations where a strict food only approach could actually be to the detriment of not only the performance but the health of an athlete. So we take an athlete who maybe has got an iron deficiency or a vitamin D deficiency, or we take an athlete who despite the best efforts can't get enough protein into a diet in a day, then actually a food only approach could actually do a lot more harm than good.
Yeah. I'll be slightly controversial at this point in time, it's not like me, is it, Graeme? and say that my understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, but we have a great article in the series that you've got on vegetarian and veganism, is that the vegetarian and vegan, and certainly the vegan approach to eating food first could be problematical. Food only could be problematical because certainly the vegan athlete does, in many respects, either have to eat quite a lot of a product because it's missing in an essential amino acid or an essential fatty acid, and therefore supplement.
Yeah, but there's a couple of really good examples there. So vitamin B12, we're not going to find in plant-based foods. So either we need to take a B12 supplement or we need foods that are already fortified with it. And there is quite a lot of plant-based foods now that are fortified with B12, so that shouldn't be a major issue. Protein is a good example where, in theory, we can certainly get all the protein we need on a plant-based diet. But if I've got a 120 kilo rugby player who needs 2 grams per kilogram body mass to try and achieve 240 grams of protein, either in a plant-based or even in a carnivorous diet, it's quite hard to hit them numbers without feeling too full, and particularly with plant-based eating, without feeling full of fibre and gut discomfort. And then another good example though, and again this is, you can put the same argument to carnivorous as well as plant-based, is creatine. That in theory you can get enough you can get creatine in a diet, but we're going to have to eat almost a kilogram of raw meat a day, and unless you're a cougar, I'm not convinced you're going to be eating a kilogram of raw meat. So that's certainly one good example of where a food only approach would be the detriment of the performance of the athlete.
Yeah.